Hello everyone, welcome back to another Live at 5. I am your host, curator Kevin Adkisson with the Cranbrook Center for Collections and Research, and I have been doing a lot of research and thinking about Eliel Saarinen and about the German Bauhaus, and so I thought that for Live at 5 I would take a little break and I would come over and think about the arts and crafts movement. Why was I thinking about the Bauhaus, you ask? Because at 7 o'clock I am delivering a lecture on the German art school and how it impacted and what relationship it had for Cranbrook. Tickets are still available, $20 at center.cranbrook.edu. I would love to have you all there. But for today's Live at 5, it has been a minute since we have been over at Cranbrook House. The fountains are off, like all of Cranbrook's fountains, but the gardeners of the Cranbrook House and Gardens Auxiliary have been hard at work, and things are looking quite resplendent here on the West Terrace. I am not an expert in plants, though, so we will enjoy them as we walk through the garden. But I actually want to talk about Cranbrook House and its arts and crafts detailings. Now, if you want to know a lot more of my thoughts about Cranbrook's house and the arts and crafts movement, do check out my YouTube video that was from this winter in my History of American Architecture course. But for today, I thought we would just look at some of the principal features that make up an arts and crafts house. And those of you watching, I hope that you have watched enough videos that you know a bit about the arts and crafts movement, or I'm sure you knew it before Live at 5 as well. But it was an English movement that worked against the Industrial Revolution, and it argued in favor of the handcraft, in favor of the of labor and of the workmen, and in particular, it rejected essentially everything after the Renaissance. So its painters were called pre-Raphaelites. Its architects didn't get such a great name. We could call them pre-Brunelleschis, I don't know. But the English movement spreads around the world, including to Germany, as we'll learn about in my upcoming Bauhaus lecture at 7 o'clock. I'm really trying to sell these tickets, guys. I need people in the audience. Kidding, we're doing fine, but I do want you there. But the English movement comes to America in really a diverse array of styles. And when I came to Cranbrook and they said, oh, this is an arts and crafts house, I said, it seems to me more just sort of American eclectic or Edwardian eclectic, because I was under the impression that the arts and crafts was really craftsmen. And the craftsman movement is a subset of the arts and crafts movement. And this is my favorite way to look at the house, is this corner. The front of it really does very little for me. And so Cranbrook House is not craftsman style, but it is distinctly English arts and crafts. And so for the next few minutes, I thought that we would review some of the properties that make this an arts and crafts home. The architect was Albert Kahn, the great industrial architect, and one principle of the arts and crafts movement, you use local materials. So let's look down at the lowest level of the house, and we see all of these different colors of granite. And these are from the last ice age, which had a terminal moraine here in Bloomfield Hills. And so within the working farm that George Booth bought, there were all these different granite rocks, and the workmen on site took them out of the fields and began building the house with rock from the site. I wish I knew more about these bricks, because the arts and crafts movement would also have us use brick from the site. I imagine these brick are from Ohio, which is the brick-making center of the Midwest. But it's an interesting pattern that they're in. They're laid in what's called an English bond. So you have a row of all stretchers and then a row of all headers. And this English bond had been popular way, way back in medieval times, fell out of favor for Flemish bond, which is debatably structurally more sound. And it was revived as part of the arts and crafts in the 19th century. So we have the right use of materials down here, the right use of materials up here, or the right brick coursing. Since we're all about technology today, the vertical mortar joint is called a perpend. There is no fun name for the horizontal. The next material that we see is Indiana limestone, which again is a fairly local material. I've always been kind of intrigued by what is happening here, and whether this is Albert Kahn or if it's George Booth. I like what's happening, but it's always struck me as a little odd, this porch. Originally, the house did end right here, and I think maybe it made more sense as a sort of corner piece to the larger terrace. As it is, it's a little wonky, but I like it. And then there are these exposed wooden beams. And part of the arts and crafts movement wants us to be truthful with materials and to truthfully express how the building is made. And so if we look closely, we see these wonderful sort of tile bricks. I don't know if this tiny of bricks have a name. Roman bricks are skinny, but these are absolutely diminutive, and they have the same size mortar as brick, which is something that you see in the late Roman period and Byzantine era. We look up, though, and we see that this brick, or this wooden beam, is stretching between the columns. Now, this is a house made out of concrete blocks, so none of this is truly doing the structural work, but the facade of it expresses the structural work. That is a key difference between the English and the American arts and crafts. The Americans, who bring over no morals with their design movement, are much more willing to sort of build a technologically advanced house and clad it in the look they want. An English architect would probably have actually either used a wooden beam there that was load-bearing or used a concrete beam and expressed the concrete. Now, the next material that we see as we work our way up is render. Now, because of HGTV and realtors, you might want to call this stucco, but stucco is a render that has sand and other additives to it. So stucco is a type of render, but the more general term and the correct term, especially when talking about an arts and crafts house, is render. And so it's a concrete mixture that has been painted this lovely shade of brown. For many years it was improperly painted white. And then within the render you see these windows. And it's very common for the arts and crafts to mix types of windows. So these are casement windows. You can see the one that's opened there with the air conditioning unit. And then right next to it is a sash window, a double hung window. And part of that is to make it seem like the house grew over time and it's older than it is. One fun thing with English arts and crafts houses is that they often have dates carved in them that are completely arbitrary, or date to, a well that was on this site in 1640, but the house was built in 1905. This house is correctly dated to 1908, but part of having different types of window is to make it feel like, oh, this is a house from the Elizabethan era that has been updated over the years by the humble, glorious workmen. Does anyone have any questions while we walk around? I want to go to my next feature. The arts and crafts movement is a sort of one of the streams that feeds into modernism, probably the one that runs courses most powerfully. And part of what makes these houses feel so modern and what was so shocking to a Victorian viewer is how simple it is. That you would build a massive home like this and keep everything so clear and structurally expressive and unornamented and uncarved is very much sort of against the Victorian movement. And when you compare Cranbrook House to the house the Booths came from in Detroit, it was full of little stone putti and gargoyles and acanthus leaves, and it had all of the sort of right moves of the Victorian era, gables on gables on gables. But here, it is this much more modern sort of expression of surface and roof. And since we've stepped a little way, we can see the roof. This is from the Ludovici Tile Company in Ohio. This is from circa 2005 to 2018. And it was remade using the same molds from the 1908 and 1918 roof. It was a new product from Ludovici when it was built. And this is one of the most important early projects. And so if you notice, things like the roof tiles at the corner or at the top are all custom shapes. And they found the original molds in order to rebuild this roof. One place that the arts and crafts movement enjoys adding detail is with ceramics or terracotta. Terracotta is simply a sculpted brick, and ceramics are just bricks you take more time doing. So all of this is fired clay and earth with different additives and glazes. Here we see a scene rendered in this sort of medieval style with her blue hair being dyed. That's another Live at 5 will be the story of the tile. Now, another common arts and crafts technique or detail is to incorporate stained glass within the window. And you see there a piece of Swiss medieval glass that has been put within the leaded glass window. Now, arts and crafts architecture like Cranbrook House, you don't want to call major attention to the window. So notice the window doesn't have any sort of extra framing. It doesn't have, it is made up of only the parts that are necessary, the sort of vertical mullions, the cross bracing, and then the window frame itself, the steel window frame. There's no sort of column capitals or engravings or ornament on either side of the window. Part of that expressing the sort of truth of the craftsmanship. Another common trait of the arts and crafts is to run proto-ribbon windows where you line them all up. And it's a little bit unclear where this comes from. It's not something that you would have seen in pre-Renaissance architecture, which is, again, the sort of style that they're looking for, or looking towards. So it's not something that came from Elizabethan architecture, because that's so much glass, and glass was the most expensive thing on your house. But it becomes a real sort of trope of the arts and crafts to run windows in bands, and then have sort of dormer windows in bands as well. Dogs are not allowed at Cranbrook House and Gardens. They are allowed at Cranbrook. No dogs, no bikes, no picnics, please. In order to preserve the beauty of the gardens and all of the hard work that the gardeners put in. But you can take your dogs to the other side of campus, but we do try to run this as a very serious garden with specimen plants, and it's all volunteer labor and love, so we want to treat the gardens and the plants with that respect. Sorry, a dog named Rocco, who is watching, with your opposable thumbs. So we made it to the front of Cranbrook House, which is not my favorite facade. I think it looked better before all the wings had been added on, but I find it to be just a little bit unsoul-stirring. Who knows? I probably shouldn't put that in film, but I can delete this later. No, I won't. The front of the house has this pattern of brick within a limestone surround, render, and then half timbering. And this is the main use of half timbering on the house, which again comes from medieval English architecture and was revived in the arts and crafts movement. Earlier architects would have covered it up with shingles or with render, and the building structure would not be expressed. Here, however, those trees, those logs, are not structural, but they are expressed. And I do really appreciate the detail that goes into our half timbering, whether it is the mortise and tenon joint, where you can see that corbel is sticking through the barge board, and then it's pinned in with another piece of wood. It's a furniture joinery technique that would have been used by architects and house builders in Elizabethan England. A joiner is someone who made furniture or buildings, and so it's expected, it's correct that a house would look like it was made by a furniture maker. I also love the sort of front beam coming across and how it is wider at the center than the edge, so it's expressing the structural weight of the gable and how it is carrying the load from these half timbers. We call them half timbers because imagine that you have a tree and you cut it in half, you put the round side in the house and the flat half is in front, and then you render between it. And so it is literally half of a timber. I don't know if these are true half timbers. I imagine they're just wooden boards. And then there is the beautiful front door, which has 1908, and then the ornament with this garden of plants and flowers and vines. Fairly unusual to have an arts and crafts door that is this heavily styled. Usually an arts and crafts door is much more simple and would have its visual interest from its metal hardware. What's interesting about this door is there is no metal hardware, and instead it has this sort of Baroque strap work. If anyone has any other questions, do type them in. And we come to the side where we see one of my favorite details, which I think is not unique to Albert Kahn, but it's certainly special at Cranbrook House, which is windows within the chimney. How is that possible? Well, that's because the fire is running up to the side and past that window. The next is in this wall, so it's running up to the side. And then there are fireplaces on the second floor, and so you end up with the chimney, and all of the fireplaces are going up through the chimney, but this bathroom is able to have a window within the chimney. What is that S there? That is structure, and it is a iron bracket. So you can see one running there. Do you see the piece of iron that is helping to keep that chimney upright? And this is a 1919 edition on the house. And then see how the iron strap comes through and it makes this S shape on the front of the house. Now, a lot of times in Boston and Philadelphia and some places in New York, you'll see brick buildings that look like they have a paper brad coming out of them, like it's a brick wall and there are two flanges. That is one of these same iron supports where they tie a tie back and they tie it through the front of the house and then split the iron bar in half and bend it back. These S's are bolted to the iron bar and are just a sort of more elegant solution to the same problem of helping to keep things upright. Now, if anyone has any other questions, type them in. If not, head over to center.cranbrook.edu and sign up for the lecture. It starts at 7. It's going to be very different from today's arts and crafts tour. Now, by the time we get to the 1919, fondness for building, and there is just a lot of design and architecture. I am not sure if it really holds the sort of arts and crafts as strongly as the other side of the house. That's why I really enjoy the north and west sides. But, of course, this is the great view into Cranbrook Gardens, where we see all of the love and labor and tenderness given to the plants of the sunken garden, which are really flourishing with their design. And then, of course, there are the arts and crafts style outbuildings, which are still painted too bright of a white shade, but you see. So with that, we'll look at the most unfortunate end of Cranbrook House, which is this very large faux half timbering, as I squeeze past some visitors. And we see a really the most charming of the arts and crafts style gardens, where little enclosed sits within the garden. And I thought I would bring us down here to see something that all of my architecture students and lovers of design certainly know about, but you may never have seen one in person, and that is an acanthus. And so it is acanthus season, everyone. And so this is the design motif that inspired the Romans to design the Corinthian column capital, and the Greeks and everyone after them. And so when the next time you're at a beautiful federal building or government building or a bank, any sort of neoclassical Beaux-Arts architecture, and you see an acanthus leaf on the column capital, this is what you are seeing. And so this becomes very stylized when it's carved in stone, but I think it is wonderful that we have this specimen of an acanthus. It is the one flower which I can identify here at Cranbrook House and Gardens, thanks to a garden tour that identified it for me. So I think that about wraps up our tour of some of the arts and crafts details of Cranbrook House and Gardens. Now, the architect was Albert Kahn, but with lots of input from George Booth, and it's really George Booth whose personality is stamped onto this house and its terraced gardens. We're coming up to what I think is the most beautiful sort of single image of the house, where it really just sings with its arts and crafts beauty. And you see the render, the half timbering, the limestone and brick, the running windows, the chimneys, all of the great principles of the best of arts and crafts English architecture, from designers like Voysey and Lutyens and other Englishmen who were inspiring George Booth and whom he was reading about and visiting their buildings on his travel. Thanks so much for joining me for another Live at 5. I'm Kevin Adkisson with the Cranbrook Center for Collections and Research, and we are having a number of events coming up. Tonight at 7, there's a lecture on the Bauhaus, in case you haven't heard about it. It was also at 10 a.m., rave reviews. People were weeping at the end, I think. I couldn't see on Zoom, but there were lots of good questions, and I could just sense it was powerful. So that will happen again from 7 to 8. I know some of you already have tickets. If you don't, you have 36 minutes to pick them up at center.cranbrook.edu. On Saturday, we will be hosting a concert here of Sila. It's a special Michigan premiere of a piece that premiered at Lincoln Center last year. It is a modern composition with brass and drums performed by the Great Lakes Wind and Strings Ensemble. Tickets are $100 to that event, and it will be fully socially distant and taking place at Cranbrook School for Boys Quadrangle. I will be there. It's going to be exciting. It's going to be a beautiful evening in the quad, and the first event that Cranbrook has hosted in person. So it should be quite thrilling, and a very limited engagement in seating pods that are clearly going to be marked. So you can sign up for that through our Facebook, but the tickets do go through Great Lakes Wind and Strings. And lastly, next month, we'll have another Uncovering Cranbrook lecture on Frank Lloyd Wright, Japan, and the Smith House. So something to put on your calendar and look forward to. I hope you're all doing well. I'm going to see those of you who are my biggest fans and supporters and lovers of Cranbrook and the Bauhaus in about an hour and a half at the 7 p.m. Cranbrook Academy of Art, an American Bauhaus ? Lecture. So see you then. Have a great day, enjoy the sunshine, wear your mask, and be safe, everyone.